Please join me in a moment of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, and may more light and more truth break forth from your holy word. Amen. I want to start today's reflections by explaining a little bit about what's going on here with my stole. I was Please join me in a moment of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, and may more light and more truth break forth from your holy word. Amen. Well, to start just a moment, I wanted to explain my stole. Last week, all people could see were these T's. They don't mean anything. They're just graphic designs, but the stole actually has Advent candles on it. And Advent candles on my stole refer to the Advent candles that are here. The candle for hope was lit first, and then the candle for peace, and now we're up to the third candle, the candle of joy. And I wanted to start today by sharing a little bit of a story of a joyful experience that I had last week. Last week, I was working on this project for all of you, actually. I so enjoyed the Advent concert that was put on here at church last year, 2019. It was marvelous to see the whole chancel filled with all of the choir members. And then down on the floor of the church, we had so many members of the Missoula Orchestra, plus our own strings and friends playing, and probably 100 people here. It was a tremendous concert, but we didn't have a video recording. We did, however, have an audio recording, and Bill worked on it for a bit, and then Jean helped us get readers for the lessons part of this Lessons and Carols presentation, and then I edited together the lyrics to make it into a big sing-along over visuals, and then Graham added some titles. So the whole big project that I've been working on, I'd probably put about 12 to 14 hours in it, and then I went to go back and open up the project last Thursday to do some more work on it, and it was gone. The folder said that the contents were empty. It was not there. And I said many bad words. And then I broke down and I called Graham and I asked for help, and he had some ideas, and I was able to apply those ideas, and it took about an hour and a half, and then I hit a button and the project was restored. And that was the journey of joy. I think about the season, about how many people conflate the ideas of happiness and joy, and I love happiness. These candles during Christmas make me happy. The gifts that I give and receive, that makes me happy, and the whole kind of delight of the season that's all around. But this year, particularly, a lot of those traditions, a lot of those practices that in previous years it made us happy, we can't do, or we have to do really differently. And there's this sense of loss and questions about how we'll do those things, or maybe we'll give them up and they'll have to be let go of. And so during the season, which we think of as a joyful season or as a happy season for many people, it's been a little sadder, it's been a little darker than most. I had a colleague, actually, who sent out a post trying to find a word to describe 2020 that was church appropriate. And someone suggested that there is actually a biblical word that describes 2020. The word is Gehenna. And what it is referring to is a place where outside the city of Jerusalem, all of the garbage was dumped and then set on fire. So the word Gehenna actually is dumpster fire. It's a pretty good description of 2020, because beyond the pandemic and all of the losses and the illness and the deaths, of people and the exhaustion of people trying to cope and prevent this disease. We've had deliberate attacks on our identity as a nation, on our democracy itself. We have the ongoing cultural and spiritual genocide against so many people of color in our nation. We have the ongoing effects of climate change. A friend of mine who's a naturalist in California wrote saying that last year in her neck of the woods there were 10,000 monarch butterflies, and this year at the same time there are 200. Probably due to loss of habitat and the hundreds of fires in California alone that were burning this past summer. 2020 has been a year of so much sorrow. And as we look at this season and try to remember those things that used to make us happy, I want to cast the focus a bit larger, because we have a long and remembered history of sorrow as people of faith. People of faith know what it is to go through times of great loss and devastation and even despair by holding on to the promise of restoration and joy. First century Palestine, we know this, there was the oppression of the Roman Empire, the collusion with the government, the ongoing illness and poverty and malnutrition, the devastating social stratification that kept people outside the pale of community and God's grace. We know the grinding poverty that most of the people, probably 90% of the people or more, experienced. And one of those people, we are told in this story, was named Mary. And in her grinding poverty, in her ongoing hunger, she would have still had the memory of the promises of Isaiah, the promises of restoration yet to come. What we want to keep in mind is that there's not just one Messiah. In the course of Hebrew literature, we have David proclaimed as a Messiah. We have Cyrus the Great proclaimed as a Messiah. And all the way up to this time, people kept on looking for saviors who might be raised up for a short period of time. Political, military leaders who would restore Israel. And they would come up for short periods of time and then be put down again, this ongoing struggle for sovereignty and for control. And so when Mary, this figure, has this experience of being called upon by Gabriel to deliver the next Messiah for her people, she leans back into that history of sorrow and of devastation and despair and remembers that promise and says, yes, I will carry forward that promise. And it is that belief in that promise, that hope in that promise, and that desire to be a part of that promise that gives her the strength to sing this song. My soul doth magnify the Lord, for God has come to rescue those who have been oppressed. God will lift up those who are hungry and send the rich away empty-handed. There will be a new balance. There will be joy. But this is the part we have to remember. Joy only comes through the suffering. The promise of God's redemption only comes through when people have a desired state that they believe in and will work towards and will sacrifice towards, and that restoration will come because it has come before. I was thinking this morning of just the course of my lifetime, the kinds of great suffering that I've seen be redeemed. Part of my family background is Irish, and to know the ongoing hundreds of years of oppression were experienced in Ireland, and to have lived through much of the IRA's bombings and counterattacks and all of that, it seemed that the Irish question could never be resolved. And yet peace happened. The Berlin Wall was built right after the end of World War II, stood until the 90s. The devastation of German families being torn from each other, not able to speak to each other, not able to be in any sort of communication with each other. That wall came down. The devastation of apartheid in South Africa was ended. Those walls came down. The starvation that was rampant all over Southeast Asia was addressed by development of new wheat fields that could start to feed the people. Those walls, those barriers came down. That suffering not alleviated entirely, but my God, the joy of those moments. The way that illnesses have been addressed before with outbreaks of Ebola virus, the way that polio was ended, the way that measles and mumps and rubella vaccines have been developed. When people believe that there is another day of hope and joy that can become if we are willing to sacrifice together, if we are willing to pull together, if we're willing to hold up that candle of joy yet to come. When we're willing to do that, the joy does come. The light will shine. Friends, these days, there is so much divisive language and despair. I see among people I know and love deeply this rage against those who won't wear masks, who won't keep distance, who won't believe in science. And I will confess, I get frustrated too, but in the midst of that frustration, isn't that a reminder that these anti-mask folks, that these anti-democracy folks need to be prayed for that much more? Because we know we don't get out of this experience of life only my group, only myself, only my family, that the only way through this life is to do so together. We need to pray harder, pray more, believe harder, believe more, and to recognize that the opposite of joy is not rage, it's despair. When we are willing to choose hope over despair, when we are willing to channel those moments of our rage into action and into sacrifice, that is what makes that joy possible. That is what brings light into the world. When we refuse to give in to the anger and the rage and the despair and instead choose joy, we are choosing to be the light of Christ. We are choosing to carry the joy for all. My soul doth magnify the Lord. Our souls do magnify the Lord when we choose hope and peace and joy and love. And my prayer is that all of us can do so, especially in this season. God bless you all.